So, as we start tonight, I'd love it if you would just raise your hand if every single part of your life is going great. Like, every single part of your life is going great. Anybody? No? Nobody? Okay, well, good, because then that means I can preach to every single one of you, because this message is for those of you who may be going through something a little bit difficult. Right, I want to talk to those of you who have something painful that's in one area of your life, like, or maybe it's even a big portion of your life, but there is some pain in your life. I want to talk to those of you that may be in a season of life that feels really complicated. Or maybe it's that somebody you love is going through a season of life that's really difficult and complicated, and you're hurting for them. Maybe you've been praying for a miracle, and God just isn't answering the way you believe that He could. Or maybe you've been praying, and it's not that God isn't answering, it's that that situation is past, and the loved one you were praying for ended up passing. Or you have someone in your life, and man, you were praying and you celebrated because the cancer was gone, but then it came back. And I want to talk to some people that are going through things like that. And for many of you, it may be something kind of big like that, or it could just be that the problems, maybe they don't feel as big as cancer or loss, but there's just this ongoing thing in your life, this ongoing problem. Like, school's just, it's not great, right? It's okay, but it's not great. Your friendships aren't as good as they used to be. You're not as close. You don't have that same level of trust. Things aren't great. They're okay, but things in your family aren't great. In fact, you're kind of barely making it. And to make things worse, like, you may be sitting by somebody and you think, man, everything in their life is going perfect. They might not have raised their hand, but man, it looks like they've got it all together. And I've heard it said before that you're probably going into a hard season, you're in the middle of a hard season, or you're coming out of a hard season. And I hate every time I hear that, because it's kind of true. I mean, in this broken world that we live in that's been stained by sin, life can be really, really difficult. And Peter in the New Testament, he calls these difficulties fiery trials. Right? And some of you right now may identify with that and say, man, I am in a fiery trial right now. I'm battling with depression right now. I'm battling with just feeling discouraged all the time. Or you may just feel like your faith is being tested right now. This is what Peter said in 1 Peter 1:7. He said, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. He says it is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. And so today I want to continue our series through the book of Daniel, where we're looking at the life of Daniel and his friends, and we're going to see that Daniel and his friends, man, his friends, they were about to face a test of a lifetime, right? They're going to literally be thrown into a fiery trial, like Peter talks about. A fiery furnace. That's what we're going to be looking today. And they're going to discover that a faith that's been tested is a faith that can be trusted. Right? That's where we're going to be jumping off into this whole message, is from this point. That a faith that has been tested is a faith that can be trusted. So to start today, we're going to review quickly where we looked at last week in week 1 of this series. And again, don't forget to boo if you want to boo, because remember what we're doing here. We talked about the evil king Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, yeah, we still don't like him, right? He was wicked, he was evil, he was the most powerful man in the Babylonian Empire. And after he conquered Judah, it was horrible, right? He just destroyed the temple, mocked their faith. He took the best and the brightest young men. He captured them, took them away from their homes and from their families, and he took them to this foreign land and began teaching them ways that weren't theirs and these evil views that they had in Babylon. And Daniel and his 3 friends were 4 of these young men that were taken. And his friends were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And now King Nebuchadnezzar, he had an inflated sense of importance, right? He kind of had a big ego. And so he made a gold statue of himself. And this statue was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And to give you some scale, that's about the size of an 8-story building. And so he's building this 8-story statue, and he invites all of the government leaders, all the important people to come to the dedication of this statue when it's finally finished. The statue that he's made for himself, because that's who this guy was. Like, look at how important I am. Here's my statue. I'm an evil man with a big statue. That was him. And so Daniel chapter 3 says this, starting in verse 4. Then a herald shouted out. This is just the announcer of the town. A herald shouted out, when you hear the sound of the musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So this guy builds this big statue of himself and says, tell everybody to worship that statue of me, made of gold. And if you don't, you're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And so what happens? There's some kids there, probably teenagers, 14, 15, 16, who love God. Man, they love God, and they don't want to worship a false idol. And if you think about the situation that they're in, like, it really doesn't get any more serious than this. Because what happens, like, the message is that when the band starts playing, you bow down and worship my statue. And if you don't, you're going to be killed. Like, literally, he wasn't like metaphorical, like, you are going to die. That's what this was. That was the situation these kids were in. This is a test. Right? It's a trial. And remember, a faith that's been tested is a faith that can be trusted. And someone right now in this room, you are in the middle of a test. And your faith is being strengthened because a faith that's been tested is a faith that can be trusted. So the king says, bow down and worship the statue or you're going to die. And there's this big crowd there. Everybody came for the dedication of this statue. And what do you think they did, the crowd? Anybody want to take a guess at what the crowd did? Did they stand up or did they bow down? They bowed down. Why? Because they didn't want to die. Right? Verse 7 says, so at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshipped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So picture this, right? This big gold statue. Everybody's here. All the important people. Everyone's bowing down and they're worshiping. Oh, great statue, great king. You're so amazing. We'll worship you. And then there's these 3 boys not bowing. There's these 3 guys still standing up. And the leaders start looking around like, these dudes serious? Like, they're disobeying the king. Like, there's no way these kids are serious. And so they're like, well, we got to tell the king. So that's what they did. They run to the king. And they're like, look at what they did. And the king, like, that's not right. I built this statue of myself. I'm the king. I'm the best. I'm the greatest. Look at my big statue. So he screams at these kids and he basically says, you better bow. I'm going to give you one more chance or you're going to die. And verse 16 tells us what they did. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him. And watch their reply. Right? Watch the respect and the directness and the kindness that they respond with. Because these kids, they're not arrogant. They're not mean. They're not critical. They're clear and they're direct, but they're respectful. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. They say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. They say, the God we serve is able. I don't need to tell you about my faith. I don't need to tell you why your rules are stupid. I don't need to make a big point. I'm just going to tell you we worship God. We're not bowing down to you because the God we serve is able. And I want you to think about this. Because that preaches really well, and it sounds good when you're here. Yeah, our God is able. But when your life is on the line, literally, you're about to be thrown into a fire, they still stand and say, our God is able. When everyone else bows down, we're going to stand. They refused to compromise their faith, even in the face of death. They refused to compromise. And we just need to let that sink in for a moment, because that is bold. Right? They refused to compromise, even in the face of death. And let's just acknowledge for a minute how easy it would have been for them to just kind of blend in and compromise in this moment. Because think about it, everyone else is bowing down because they didn't want to die. Think about how easy it would have been to rationalize, all right, guys, let's just bow down this one time. They could have just, faked it. We're bowing down, we're acting like we're bowing, but I'm going to, stay just up enough, or, I'm going to, cross my fingers behind my back so I don't really mean it. They could have faked it and just kind of blended in. Or they could have, done it just this one time, all right, we need to do this, we're just going to worship and then ask God for forgiveness because, he'll understand, right? He doesn't want us to die. They could have done that. They could have rationalized worshiping this one time. They could have said, man, if God really wants us to make an impact and reach people, we can't do that if we're dead. So God's got to be okay with us doing it this one time, so we'll be safe. And so you can see how easy it would have been for them to just rationalize it and compromise their faith to fit in and to be safe. But they refused to compromise their faith, even in the face of death. And so if we're honest with ourselves, it's difficult for us to really imagine that. Right? It's hard for us to imagine what it means to have faith in the face of death. Because for us in the United States, it's pretty safe to worship God. And so it's pretty easy for us to hear this story and just kind of write it off as an Old Testament Bible story that doesn't really mean much to me. I'm never going to be in that situation. I'm never going to have my life in danger for my faith. Well, maybe not, depending on how things go. But I want to say this, because what I know for a fact about each of you is that your faith is tested in many ways every single day. Every single day, whether you see it right now or not, you're in this same situation. Every single day. Whether you're going to compromise your faith and laugh at that joke that's not God-honoring, or if you're not. Whether you're going to compromise your faith and join in the gossip, or if you're not. Whether you're going to treat people with love and respect and dignity, or if you're not. Whether you join in the chaos and the sin and the corruption of this world, or if you're going to try and rise above it and keep that mission of Jesus higher than everything else in your life. Every single day, your faith is tested just like theirs. Every single day, you have a choice between doing what's right and doing what's easy. Every single day. Between what's right and what's easy. Between what pleases God and what helps you fit in to this world and what pleases people. At the heart of it, I can describe it this way, that you have a choice every single day between worshiping God with your life or giving your heart to an idol. And you may hear that and think, well, I would never give my heart to an idol. I would never worship a statue. Like, it doesn't apply to me. And to that, I would say, check your screen time. Maybe you've already given your heart to an idol. I'd never give my heart to something that's directly opposed to God. Pull up your Spotify Wrapped from last year and let's see who you let influence your mind the most. Is it people speaking God-honoring life, or is it people that aren't? I would never give my heart to an idol, but I'm going to make sure I post every time I get a new outfit or every time I get some new shoes, and I'm going to make sure everybody sees all the stuff I've got. So often we've already given our hearts to idols. We just don't recognize them as that. And I promise you, if you're committed to serving God, the devil will tempt you to compromise your faith in God. You're going to be tempted to compromise. You're facing it every single day. And so when we look at these boys and we see that even in the face of death, they refused to compromise their faith. It's not hard for us to apply that to our life because we're faced with it every day. And so let's go back to our story in Daniel 3. I want us to look at their faith again. Verse 17. Look at their response. It says, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. That right there is something we've got to tell ourselves. It's something I have to tell myself. Because I have hard times too. And so I have to tell myself, no matter what I face, my God is able. No matter what I face, my God is able. And you've got to tell yourself that when you don't know what you're going to do. When your faith is getting low. Like sometimes you've got to preach it to yourself and tell yourself, my God is able. Like we just need to remind ourselves that I serve the God who says with him all things are possible. I serve the God who has the ability to open up blind eyes, who can open up deaf ears. I serve a God who can speak to that which is dead and bring it back to life. My God is able. And I don't know what it will be for you, but somebody you know, somebody you love, or maybe it's you, might get a bad medical report. And you may say, man, that's bad. I don't like that. I don't want this in my life. But I'm going to preach this to myself and say, my God is able to heal. Some of you may look at your relationships, or your friendships, or you look at your parents' marriage and you think, man, there's no way God could ever fix that. There's no way God could ever fix what's broken in this spot. But you preach this to yourself and you say, no, my God is able to restore what is broken. You may be struggling and just feeling empty and worn out right now. You've got to remind yourself, my God is able to meet all of my needs according to his glorious riches. My God is able. Right? My God is able. Say that if you believe it. My God is able. Say that. Right? Now say it again. My God is able. All right, now say it like you actually believe it this time. My God is able. Our God is able. My God is able. But what if God is able and he doesn't? What if my God is able to heal and he doesn't? What if God is able to provide, but I still find myself lacking? What if he is able and he doesn't? You ever been there? Like if we can just be real, I mean, we're praying and we're praying and we're praying and I'm believing and I'm doing what's right and I'm praying for change and I'm believing that God will do this and he doesn't. That's tough. And we see These guys face this very real possibility. In verse 17, they say this: the God whom we serve is able to save us. Our God is able. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But then in verse 18, watch what they say. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Our God is able. We know he can. We believe he will. Whatever you're facing right now in your fiery trial, and I know there's many of you that are here and that can relate to this, and you're asking God to deliver you from it right now. One of the greatest faith statements you could ever make is this: God, I believe you can. God, I believe you will. But even if you don't, I still believe. God, I believe you can. I believe you will. But even if you don't, I still believe. Even if you don't, God, I will still trust you. I'll still serve you. I'll still honor you. I will still believe. There's some of you that God didn't do what you thought he would do, what you knew he could do, what you'd hoped he would do. And maybe it was enough to make you walk away from him entirely. If that's you, I just want to say very lovingly, that's not a real faith. Faith is believing that he can, but faith is also believing he's king no matter what. Faith is believing that he can, that he is able, but faith is still believing that no matter what, even if he doesn't, he's still sovereign. Real faith, a faith that's been tested, a faith that can be trusted, real faith believes on the other side of disappointment. Even when we experience disappointment, real faith comes through the other side and says, I still believe. So maybe you've been there. Maybe you feel like you're there right now where you say, God, I'm mad. God, I wish you would have done this instead. God, I wish you wouldn't have brought that to my life. I wish this wasn't happening. But at some point in your life, you have to determine, is he God or are you? Is he God who I will still believe in no matter what? Or am I? And he didn't do what I wanted, so I'm walking away. The king, after hearing their response, ordered the furnace to be turned up 7 times hotter than normal. Because he's ticked. He's mad. He's got a big statue and they're not worshiping him. So he orders his strongest soldiers to round these guys up, tie them up, and throw them in the furnace. And what we see is that he shouldn't have picked out the biggest, strongest soldiers to do this, because they actually got burned up by the fire, right? It was so hot that when they just approached it to try to throw these guys in, they were burned alive and were killed. Just trying to throw the guys in. So now he's already lost his top soldier, so now he's even more mad. And these 3 boys that chose to worship the one true God, not this false god, not this idol, they're in the middle of the fire. And the king looks on and he's shocked. He looks on and he's like, wait a minute. He looks around to his assistants. He's like, wait, didn't we throw 3 men into the fire? And his guys are getting nervous because they don't want to be the ones that have to approach this furnace, because they just watch these buddies get killed. And they're like, yes, 3 guys. Definitely 3 guys. Don't ask me to go count. It was definitely 3 guys in the fire. And the king says this in verse 25. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. It just got crazy. Right? This story just took a turn. This just got powerful, because now we see what we just said. Our God is able. 3 men are thrown into the fire, but our God is able, and a 4th man appears. So who's the fourth man in the fire? What Bible scholars tell us is that this fourth man is most likely Jesus. Right? This is what they call a Christophany. And what that is it's an Old Testament appearance of Christ. And you're trying to wrap your mind around this. How can that be? Jesus wasn't born until the New Testament. Right? But remember, in the beginning was God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. There's always been God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus has always been there. Jesus didn't just start being when he was born. Like, he was around from the very beginning. He was with God before he was ever flesh. And so many believe very adamantly that this was likely a Christophany. This was Jesus meeting with these boys in the fire. And this is where our story goes to a whole other level. Jesus met them in the fire. Jesus met them in the fire. And hold that thought, because we're going to come back to it and we're going to make it personal. But now, fast forward to the end of the story. The story tells us, did the boys die or did they survive? Right, they survived, right? They miraculously survived. And not only did they survive, but there was no harm even on their body. Right, it says their bodies didn't even smell like smoke. You can't sit around a campfire without smelling like smoke for a week. And these guys just walked around in the middle of a furnace and don't even smell of smoke. And I just believe that there is someone here and you're going through a trial, a fiery trial right now. And I just want to proclaim it over you that by the power and by the grace of God, you're not only going to get through without being burned, but you're going to come out and you're not even going to smell like smoke. Your God is going to prove himself faithful to you. You're going to walk through the fire. You're going to walk through this test, and you're going to come out on the other side. And if you look at our story, the next thing you know, King Nebuchadnezzar, the guy who resented these boys, hated them for their faith in God, he promotes them. And he decides on the spot to put his faith in their God. He looks at them on the other side of this trial and says, any God who can do that, I want to put my faith in that God. Verse 28 tells us this. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. This evil king is now worshiping God. The one who just commanded everyone to worship him is now worshiping their God because of their faith. He says they trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own. God is able, and God showed up. And I just want us to slow down for a moment, because I want to point out to you exactly what God did and exactly what God didn't do. This is important. Notice, when did God deliver these three guys? When did he deliver them? He didn't deliver them from the fire. God delivered them in the fire. And that may not sound like a big difference, but it is so important. God didn't make the fire go away. He didn't make the king change his mind and not throw them in. He delivered them in the fire. He might not make this situation, this trial, this test that you're going through completely go away. But I hope you'll hear this and embrace this truth that God doesn't always deliver us from our trials, but he will always be with us in our trials. God might not deliver you from it, but he's going to be with you in it. He's going to be with you in the middle of your trials, in the middle of the worst fiery trial of their lives. Jesus met them in the fire. Jesus met them in the fire. And why I want to talk to those of you that I said at the beginning are going through something difficult. This is why, because when you put your faith in him, Jesus will always meet you in your fire. Jesus will meet you in the fire. He might not rescue you from it. You might still have to go through that time that sucks. You might still have to hurt for a season, but Jesus will meet you in the fire. I want you to think about these three guys if you can. They're in the fire, and Jesus appears. They're surrounded by flames. They just watched the men throw them in here. They're dead now. They're still alive. Jesus is with them now. These guys are losing their mind. Like, they have to be just beside themselves of what is happening. And I just wonder, or I just imagine, like, I bet Jesus didn't just show up and just be like, what's up? Like, I can't imagine Jesus was just like nonchalant about this. Like, we have a God who speaks, and so I imagine Jesus talked to them. And this is where it gets personal, right? It gets so emotional to think about. Like, I wonder what Jesus would have said to them when he met them in the fire. Like, just imagine Jesus looking at these three guys who stood up for their faith. Just saying, man, your heavenly Father's so proud of you. You chose to worship him. You didn't give in. You stood strong for your faith. I wonder if Jesus told them, like, hey, because of your faith, in a few moments when we get out of here, King Nebuchadnezzar is going to worship God. He's going to put his faith in God because of you guys. Or maybe Jesus told them, like, hey, I know that you don't care about this much right now, but you're going to be remembered throughout history. People who are hurting and going through trials of their own are going to hear your story and feel encouragement. I just wonder what Jesus said when he met them in the fire. Because when you think about it, this fiery furnace looked like the place where they were going to lose their life. It looked like the end of their story. But it turned out to be the place where they met Jesus. And whatever you're going through, you can hold on to that same hope. Even when it looks like this is the end of everything. When it looks like there's no way out. That's how it looked for these guys. But that was exactly where they met Jesus. And I have to believe if you hold strong to your faith and you walk through whatever that trial is, you will meet Jesus in that trial. It will not be the end of you. Because it'll actually be where you meet Jesus. And I want you to believe me when I tell you this because I've lived it. He's always been with me in the fire. He's always with you. He's always with you. And he's with you now. Jesus will meet you in the fire. So as we take this time to respond, whatever you're going through, Jesus wants to meet you in it. He'll speak to you in it. He'll walk with you through it. And so maybe tonight you just need to just go before God. Just thank him for being with you through the fire. Maybe you just need to confess, God, I don't understand why this is happening. God, I would have never chose this, but God, I'm going to continue to serve you, love you, and believe because I know you're in it with me. Or maybe you've been walking through this life without God. You don't have a faith of your own. And you feel like life is starting to wear you down, like you're actually starting to get burned by the fire. Because nothing else you've tried has really helped. Maybe tonight you just need to put your faith in a God who is able. Just like King Nebuchadnezzar did. Any God who can do that, I'm going to put my faith in that God. Our hearts can cry the same thing. Any God who is able to love me, forgive me, give me new life, walk with me through the trial, set me free from shame and guilt. Any God who would send his son to die for me, I want to put my faith in that God. A God who is able. So I never have to walk alone. Or maybe you just need to stand and worship God for who he is. For the fact that he's never left you. The fact that he is able. However you need to respond, whether it's by yourself, you need to talk with an adult, you've got questions, whatever it is, you respond as this song plays before we head into our time of family groups.